Welcome to Horror TV. This is your host, Killenberg. On this episode, I'm going to be reviewing episode 3 of Bates Motel. The episode's title is, What's Wrong with Norman? Okay, so the episode starts with a recap from episode 1 and 2. And I think every episode from now on has that. Then we see Dylan holding a gun, and he's like drawing his gun in the mirror, like what people in the Wild West do. He walks into the kitchen and says, "Good morning, Mr. and Mrs. Bates." Norma says she needs his help today. He says he would love to, but he has a job. She asks, doing what? He says nothing. He walks out and she says her china isn't a go-to container. Norman's now at his locker. Emma asks if they can talk. Norman says they'll be late to class. Emma says she'll do bullet points. She says she's worried those guys will find them and she feels guilty. She says she used the look for the dead girl thing to get him to hang out with her. She says she didn't believe it was true until she saw the shed. Norman tells her to calm down. He says they have to go to class and he tells her to forget about it. He says the journal is pornographic and they're in school. She says most texts are more sexual than that. He asks why she's obsessed with it. She says it was in his room. He says he's not obsessed with it. Now in class, Norman is clicking his pen and he's seeing his paper as the journal. Watson asks if he's okay. He just sits there. She says he knows this and he answered all those questions in class. He sees her tied up and then passes out. We see the opening for the show. Now at the hospital, we see Norman in a bed and Norma's asking what they're testing for. The doctor says a bunch of stuff. He asks if he has a history of blackouts. She asks why he would ask that. He says they're trying to establish a history. It's standard. He asks again. She says, no, never, not at all. We see Dylan in a truck with Ethan. Ethan's that guy from the bar, for those that don't know. Oh, excuse me, the strip club, not the bar. I don't know why I said bar. They go to the woods. When they get there, they hear a man tell them to get on the ground. It turns out he was messing with them. He tells Dylan, don't shoot your pants off, and they call him noob. Yet he draws his gun like he did in the mirror. The two that were there leave. Dylan asks what they do now. Ethan says they chill. He says they can even sleep if you want, as long as they do it in shifts. He explains there's $5 million worth of weed in those fields, and someone's got to guard it. Dylan says $300 a day to hang out. Norman clicks the button for the machine. I apologize in advance, I don't really know what it's called. Norma tells him it's not a toy. We see that he's watching an old movie. Norma says they'll get the test results soon and says don't worry. He says he's not worried and asks if she is. Norma's phone rings. She says it's the carpet and they need someone to sign. Norman tells her to go and says he'll be fine. She tells them she'll be there in 10. The carpet people. She tells Norman she'll be back. They say they love each other. Bradley walks in with flowers. She tells him sorry that we couldn't talk when you visited. She says it meant a lot to her that he showed up. She says no one else came and says he's brave. She says she figured she would return the favor. He asks how her dad was. She says in a medically induced coma and they don't think he'll make it. Bradley asks about Norman's dad. He explains that he passed away. She says her friends don't get it. She asks if she can stay for a while. He says he was watching an old movie. She asks if he likes old movies. He says yeah, and it says people seem happier in old movies. He says they can watch something else. She says no and tells him to scooch over. She says she just wants to be happy. Yeah, she actually lays in bed with him. Norma's talking to the carpet people. We see Alex say police. She asks what is going on. He says they have a warrant. She says they can't just walk into her home. He says, no, actually we can. We see Norma go to the hospital. The doctor says he was just about to tell Norman the test results came back and everything was negative. She asks if they can go home. The doctor says he would like to keep him overnight for observation. She says they said he was okay. The doctor says he said the results were negative, but they still don't know why it happened. The doctor leaves and she tells him they're leaving and starts taking off the equipment. A nurse tells her she can't do that. She explains that the doctor has to check him out. She says she is his mother and she is checking him out. While in the hall, she tells him what happened. He asks if she saw them take anything out. She says there was nothing to take out. Back at the house, we see Norma and Norman walk in. He runs upstairs. He says he needs to lie down and change. He looks under the bed and finds nothing under there. And if you guys been paying attention, there was a bunch of stuff under his bed. He starts to look worried. He asks himself, "What's wrong with me?" repeatedly. We see Norman in different clothes and sitting on his bed. He stands up and goes downstairs. In the kitchen, we find out Norma made a turkey pot pie. She asks him to set the table. He tells her he kept Keith's belt. She asks why. She asks where it is now. He says he doesn't know. He explains he kept it under the bed. She asks why he would keep it. He says he doesn't know. She says if the police found it, they would have told them. Norman says he doesn't know. Norma says she'll be right back and leaves. Back to Dylan and Ethan. Dylan asks if they can watch it and smoke it. Ethan says not on the job. Dylan asks how it's possible and asks if people in the town got suspicious. Ethan says that's what's keeping the town alive. Dylan asks who owns it. Ethan says a couple families in town. Dylan asks who's in charge of the families. Ethan says he asks a lot of questions. Dylan says he doesn't want to be like the guy who was burned in the warehouse. Ethan says they set Jerry on fire to send a message. Dylan says that's one hell of a message. Ethan says don't worry about it and says they got their own. An eye for an eye and all that. Ethan offers him a beer. Dylan says sure. They hear something. Ethan tells Dylan to grab a shotgun. Turns out to just be a bird. We see Emma go to the house. Norman answers and she says they need to talk. Norman says he can't because his mom's out. He tries to shut the door, but she stops him with her tank. She says she knows he passed out. She says if she forgets about the girl, the world will forget about her and it'll be like she never existed. Norman let her in. Emma is showing him something in the book. He says it's just a number. She says in English and everything else is in Chinese. He says he found the journal in room 4. In room 4, Norman shows her where he found it. Emma says those girls came from China, then guys came to the motel to try them out. Norman asks who she thinks brought them. She says Keith. She explains he was a disturbing person. Norman gets a text from Bradley. She was asking how the plant was doing. Emma went to the sink. She noticed Chinese symbols. She says she's real. We see Norma see a police car. She turns around. She sees it's Shelby and gets in. She says she knows that she doesn't know him very well, but needed a friend. She explains to him what's going on. She says she can't have cops coming in and out of her home over nothing. She says it's not like they found anything. He tells her he's on duty, but says they should talk later. He asks her to go to the house for dinner. She says she'll see him then. He tells her not to worry and everything will be okay. Now on the steps of the house, Norman asks Norma where she's going. She says she's having dinner with Shelby. He asks why. She says because he knows about the belt. We see Shelby open the door. He tells her she looks nice and she says thank you. He tells her to come in and says dinner's almost ready. He gets her coat. He offers her a drink. They sit down. She asks what's the deal. He asks about the belt. She says Romero is out to get her. He says Romero doesn't know about the belt. He explains he found the belt and no one else knows about it. He explains that Keith was a bully and had a bad temper. He says he noticed she has a bit of a temper herself. He notices a scar on her leg and asks how she got it. She says it's from when she was a child and it was an accident. He asks if that's what happened to Keith. He asks if Norman killed Keith. She says no. He asks if there's anything else she wants to say. She asks what she can say. He tells her caring for people is weighing her down. He says now he's going to take care of her. He tells her everything is going to be fine. He tells her she's beautiful and they kiss. Alright, back to Dylan and Ethan. Ethan asks him where he learned to hunt. He says South Dakota. Ethan asks if that's where the family came from. He says no and says Norma and Norman moved from Arizona. Ethan asks where his parents were from. Dylan says his dad was from Kansas, but he doesn't talk to him anymore. He says he doesn't know where his mom's from. Ethan asks if him and Norman are close. Dylan says not really. We see Norman on the couch watching TV. Dylan walks in. Norman says, "Mother?" Dylan says, "No, just me." Dylan joins him. Dylan offers him some advice. Dylan says, "Mother? That's just weird." Norman says, "It's just a habit." He then says, "I guess calling your mother a whore is perfectly normal." Dylan asks if he was in the hospital. He asks if Norman told him. Dylan says he has the bracelet on. Norman tries to take it off. Dylan says here and cuts it off with his pocket knife. Norman says thanks and Dylan says you're welcome. Dylan asks why Norma wasn't there to take care of him. Norman says she's out, but she should have been back home by now. He says she wasn't answering his calls or texts. He says he's worried because that's not like her to not answer. He says he's worried because it's not like her to not answer. He says he tried to go to bed. Dylan says he needs to get out more. He says what she's doing to him isn't healthy. Dylan says he's sorry he tried to kill him the other night. Norman tried to kill Dylan. Norman says he hardly thinks he tried to kill him. Dylan says he came at him with a meat tenderizer. Norman says, "Oh, I did?" Dylan looks confused. Norman says, "You're making this up, right?" So Norman doesn't even remember doing this. That might be a hint of something. Dylan says their family is screwed up. Norman says, "I guess we are." Norman says he's sorry he tried to kill him. He says, "Well, according to you." Dylan says it's cool. We see Norma walk in. She turns the TV off. She goes to Norman's room. She tells him he has to go to bed. She tells him everything will be okay for now. He asks what she means for now. She says Zach has the belt. She says she feels fairly safe, so don't worry. Norman asks what this means. She says it is what it is. She says Shelby has the belt and he's going to protect them. He says he thinks it's a bad idea. Norma says what, and Norman says letting him use her. She says she's not going to have that discussion with him. Norman asks what if he wants more. Norman asks what he wants her to say. She asks why he would keep that thing. He says he likes to keep mementos, like all the stuff he has in his room. She says those were good experiences. She explains it wasn't a good experience. It was horrible. It was violent. She says she was sexually assaulted and killed a man. She says why would he want to keep a memento of that? He says he's sorry, and they hug. She tells him don't worry. She says she's here for him no matter what. Back at school, we see Norman go up to Bradley. He asks why she's in school. She says that her mom says it would be good for normalcy. Emma asks if she can talk to him for a second. He says sure. She says she posted that photo on Yahoo Answers and got it translated. She says the Chinese characters read Jiao, which means beautiful. Norman says that's really sad. Emma says she's going to the police after school. Norman tells her not to. She asks why. He says he doesn't want to get mixed up with the police, but he can't tell her why. He says finding out what happened to that girl isn't going to make a difference to anyone. He says she'll still be dead, you're still going to be sick, and I'm still going to be who I am. He then says he's sorry and walks off. We see Norman lying in bed. We see it go from day to night. Norma tells him he was right. She says as long as Shelby has that belt, he can control them. She says he can make them do things they don't want to do, like what his father did. Norman says they can't let that happen. She says it's all his fault. He says he knows. She asks if he knows what he has to do. We see the full room, and we see she's not actually there. He says he has to get the belt. For those who might not fully understand that, this isn't really Norma. He's imagining this. We see Norman walking near the motel. He goes to Shelby's house. He sneaks in through a window and uses a flashlight on his cell phone. He looks around the house. In the bedroom, he finds some keys. A dog sees him and tries to attack him. He uses a bat to stop it from biting him. He shuts the door and traps the dog. He continues looking. He unlocks the door to the basement. He looks around. He turned the lights on and it turns on a disco ball. He finds a room. He turned the lights on and it flickers really badly. We see a woman on a beanbag chair. He wakes her up. He asks if she's alright. She grabs his arm. She says, "Help me." Shelby drives to his house and goes in. That's the end of the episode. My opinion on this episode, another good episode from the show. I also like how fast the storyline is moving already. It's only episode 3 and it's really interesting. I hope you liked my review of Bates Motel episode 3. Join me again next time for episode 4 of Bates Motel.